Okay.
Hi everyone, my name's Kate Rotherham. I'm a short story writer and a creative writing tutor, and I'm one of two writers this year who are shortlisting entries in the Right Around the Murray Albury City Short Story Competition, and thrilled to be doing that. This competition opened last week and entries close on the 23rd of July. So today I'm thrilled to be joined in conversation with Lucy Treloar. Lucy is the author of Wolf Island and Salt Creek, and we'll be talking about short stories today because Lucy will be judging the final shortlisted entries in the competition and choosing the winning and prize-winning stories. So great to see you, Lucy.
Oh, it's lovely to be here, and thanks so much. I'm really looking forward to reading everyone's short stories and to being involved in this fantastic competition. Thank you.
Oh, great. So today, Lucy and I get a chance to talk about short stories probably for the next half an hour or so, and we'll try and capture some of the things that we love about short story writing and reading short stories. And for anyone who's thinking about entering this year's competition, there'll be some conversation about process and craft as well. So Lucy, what is it about short stories that you love?
Oh, I think that short stories, I'm primarily a novelist. I've written a few short stories, but when I read short stories, I'm so aware of the incredible intensity that they deliver for readers, this feeling of a kind of great compression that you're finding out. You're looking through a window into someone else's life and seeing a kind of psychological moment that they're experiencing. I absolutely love that that feeling of insight that you get, and you're also looking through an author's mind as well at the material that they're writing. Yeah, I mean they have a completely different quality from novels, I suppose, in that there is that great feeling of the tininess of this moment, but the extreme significance of it for the characters that the writer is depicting. Yeah, I find that really incredible. Yeah, I'm also thinking about the kind of psychology of the characters, the mystery that's being depicted on the page, and that feeling of the writer exploring that and trying to look a little bit closer at the things that are happening in the character's life. Yeah, so I mean, novels are completely different in that they're thematically more complicated. They have larger casts of characters, much more complicated plots and subplots and so on. Yeah, so short stories are offering something completely different from novels, and I just think they're wonderful things to write, wonderful things to explore as a skill for writers. Yeah, and also there is this incredible feeling that of discovery, I think, of discovering the mystery of other people. So interesting.
Yeah, so I guess compared to a novel, you know, the short story is really, the beauty's in the brevity there, isn't it?
It sure is. It sure is. And each moment, you can have a little bit more looseness in a novel, a little bit more of a feeling of a relaxed unfolding. But in a short story, all the little moments of it have to count towards the greater picture that is being built. And so the writer is looking at what is this moment that's important for this character, and a short story will generally be looking at these turning points in a character's life. What is it about this particular moment for this character that is so interesting, that is so significant for them as characters, and that will be interesting for us. I think they're fascinating. And while you're writing, you're discovering in a way, what are your concerns as a writer? I'm always interested in that. You know, I look at my own writing and I think, oh, what is that thing that I'm always looking at? And sometimes I think, oh, you're writing about that again, are you? And you find out those things. And Laurie Moore, who's a great American short story writer, she says that you find out what your theme is and the stuff that you keep returning to. And she says it could be fate, time, love, grief, marriage, loss. I've got this short story writer friend, and I asked him what he was writing about at the moment. He said, kind of dolefully, "Oh, it's always the same thing, mothers." But I mean, you can kind of try and break out of that stuff, but you do find out the things that really interest you psychologically as a writer, and that I think because you have that engagement with your own writing, it is that you're looking to communicate to your audience.
Yes. So it's as much about what to leave out as it is to leave in, would you say, in a short story?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, you can't afford to have too much extra, too much kind of additional baggage. You're looking to really focus attention on this particular thing that's happening in a person's life. And every bit of that story will be kind of leading or supporting that exploration that you're undertaking as a writer. Yeah, it's a pretty fascinating process, I think, when you're working on a short story and you're trying to get it all working together. And so I think your focus is not only on the characters, but when you're looking at the parts of the short story, you're thinking as well about how do things like setting support the way that you're thinking about characters. So every bit of the story must be working to support it. And I mean, people think that it's kind of basically plot and character that you're looking at. But those kind of landscape issues, the settings, the things that you can reveal about the circumstances of a person's life will also speak to the sorts of concerns that you have about this short story, or, you know, the concerns of the character within the short story that you're writing.
Yeah, and certainly that idea of linking theme and place, making everything count. It's almost like a distilling, isn't it? A distilling process.
It really is. And I was thinking while I was thinking about this, and I'm very interested in landscape and setting myself as a writer, but I was thinking of how Alice Munro, the Canadian short story writer, often uses setting to not just support, but almost like she uses landscape as a metaphor for her great thematic concerns. And so quite often she will use trains or waiting in stations as ways of indicating that the character is in the midst of a transition point between one part of her life and another. You know, there will be this moment where a character will be sitting in a railway station thinking about the life that she's leaving behind, maybe just to visit this future world. But it really is about her coming to terms with leaving that past behind. So in that case, that kind of setting really supports that. Or in another case, she will use a bridge, people crossing a very narrow bridge. And that is so much about a psychologically precarious state that character's in. You know, will she get across the bridge without falling off? And we know that either way, if she fell off the bridge, that would be really interesting in the story. And if she makes it across the bridge, that will be interesting, but they will mean different things. So that setting does such a lot of work supporting that kind of interest that the writer's got in that character. Yeah, and it allows this kind of compression. And it doesn't have to be articulated. The writer doesn't have to say, she walked across the bridge and in that moment she could feel the precariousness of her own life and they seemed extremely significant. You know, the reader will get that. Yeah, so it's that kind of the subtlety of a short story, I think, that things don't have to be spelled out, but things are also working together within the short story. So interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, we've touched on some things that you love in a short story, but what are some of the things you're really hoping to find in a winning entry, or what do you love to come across in a really good short story?
Well, we all like a satisfying plot, but I think people sometimes feel that a short story should finish in a kind of tidy way, that they should end, you know, in a way that feels somehow satisfying, or we feel like things have been resolved.
With the bow.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But people should not be afraid of leaving things a little bit like quite open-ended, actually, leaving things open to interpretation, because it is about the psychological moment, not about the tying up of the psychological moment, but it is to leave the reader with a sense of wondering, you know, to be thinking about that story in the aftermath. And in a way, short stories work with the reader. They require this great engagement from the reader with the work that you're producing, and that idea of the story continuing to reverberate in the reader's mind, the reader wondering all the time about what could possibly be going to happen, what's happening with these characters, what's happening in the future, what does that moment mean. I love that, and I just read this fantastic short story. I've read it a couple of times the other day because I was kind of holding it up really close to my face as if I could kind of understand it a bit better, just kind of poring over this very kind of quality of elusiveness, but that is filled with meaning as well. Yeah. So I'm looking for that. I'm looking for a kind of great engagement with character.
Yes.
I think it's really, it's quite a common thing for people just to think that a character is a kind of type of person. So, you know, we might say someone's a middle-aged housewife, or they're a tradie, or a young mum, or a teacher, as if all of those people are exactly the same. But if we think about ourselves, we feel utterly individual. We feel unlike other people, and we are. And it is the job of the writer to find out, what is it about this person that you're writing about that is so distinct, that is completely unlike other people, and that is really interesting to a reader. They don't have to be incredibly remarkable. They don't have to have super duper jobs or be, you know, wealthy or famous, but they need to be psychologically interesting. Ernest Hemingway has this great thing that he says, it's called iceberg theory, or it's kind of been regarded shorthanded to iceberg theory, that what you see on the page is about 1/10 of what you know about the character and the plot, the entire world of your story. And when you're writing, I think it's really important to be thinking about the world that your character inhabits outside the world that you're depicting on the page. And that is not only about them, the things that they're thinking, all of their past, which you should be thinking about, what has made them the person that they are today. But it is also about, you know, the world that they inhabit. What are the dynamics of the world they inhabit? If you know that stuff, you're thinking about that with your characters and your story, all of that magically transfers to the page. That kind of complexity will appear on the page. Readers will have a sense of it. They'll be aware of it. Your characters won't be cliches, but you have to put in that work of kind of really, really thinking about your characters and your people. Yeah, so for me, that kind of attention to setting, and to the uses that you can make of setting in that metaphorical way, the way I was talking about with Alice Munro, I think they add such a lot to a story, not only in the sense of a texture, a kind of world of dimension that we're all kind of living in when we're reading that story, but also to the psychological moment that the character is existing inside. So it's really getting great connection with the story, with your landscape, your setting, and your characters. I will forgive a lot of flaws if I have that feeling that there is real life on the page. They matter a huge amount to me.
And I think that idea that creating a character that your reader will care about.
Oh, yeah, totally.
And that idea that people are complicated, that they're not all one or the other, that
or likable. That caring is not the same as liking.
No.
Caring for them, or as them being likable. They don't have to be likable. And we were chatting a little bit about Olive Kitteridge, who's the classic difficult character, I think you'd say. And yet people who have read this book have such affection for her as a person, or such kind of compassion for her as well, even when she behaves.
Generosity almost,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we kind of, I think we wish her well, even in all of her troubles and her awfulness sometimes.
Yes.
We just think, oh, Olive, don't do that. And, you know, we really, like, she's a person. That's it. We're looking for the peopleness of the characters. Yeah.
Kind of authenticity, yes. I named my dog
Totally.
after Olive Kittredge,
Oh,
so
did you?
I did have a soft spot for her.
I hope she's better behaved than Olive.
Slightly more endearing at times.
Good. Yeah. Yeah, I think we're looking at the mystery of people, aren't we? We're looking, people are mysterious, and yeah, sometimes I think it's really interesting, even just to kind of practice your observational skills, is just to look at the people around you. And, you know, sometimes people erupt out of nowhere. And I just find myself thinking, someone's got a, you know, that is a button for them. I wonder what's going on with that. And to think about that stuff. You don't have to ask them what it is, or you might want to. But it is a really good thing as a writer to speculate about what might lead to that particular sorts of behaviour. Yeah, such an important thing to do, I think.
And that's the iceberg away from the page, isn't it?
That's exactly it.
What we see is a tiny,
tiny
portion of what's happening to people.
What is your iceberg?
Exactly.
No, I find that such a great thing to do. Yeah, I love this idea that sort of strange detail sometimes makes a story really pinned to life. Sometimes writing people talk about specificity of detail, and it is just specific detail, not generic detail. So saying something is beautiful doesn't really tell you a lot, or magnificent or ugly. What is the particular thing? What is the particular thing that makes a person leap to life? Dennis Johnson, who's a fantastic American short story writer, sadly died a few years ago. Absolutely wonderful writer. But he says, I've just got it written here, there is nothing more fascinating than watching a guy trying to untie a knot from his shoelace. Nothing. And it is, you know, if you have a detail in a short story showing some small thing like that, and the way a person does that, are they frustrated in that moment? Have they got clumsy hands? Are they, you know, what are they waiting for? Do they do it with a flourish? Those sorts of things tell you a huge amount about character. And it's just reading that, I thought I had this horrible flashback to my really vile grade 2 teacher who used to hit children for, you know, their shoelaces coming undone. And you know, you know, that was such a revealing thing about her. Yeah, so think about what particular details will make your character leap to life. What would be really characteristic of them?
Yes. And I know a lot of my favourite short stories are quite filmic in a way. So it's almost like the writer knows when to zoom in on the detail, and then when to kind of pan out. So that idea of the writer kind of operating the camera there about what we see up close.
I love that as a metaphor for writing generally, this idea that you zoom out to see the big picture of character and of place, and then you zoom in and look at the extremely particular moment, just to see it being revealed. I think that's such an important point. Yeah, but I also like the idea, writers often feel like they're outsiders, and they're somehow suffering, and sometimes writers do suffer a bit. It's true. And certainly writers complain quite a bit about how difficult writing is. That's really true. But there is this little bit about writing, is that you have to really push yourself to go deeper, sometimes deeper than you feel really comfortable with. It is not about just sitting there and kind of letting the words gush out on the page, and voila, I've got a short story. It is about kind of writing those words and then standing back and looking at them and trying to read as a writer. Where is the life in that work? Where could you go deeper? And quite often it'll be some kind of emotional moment that might touch a little bit on your own emotional issues or past memories, and that you just kind of glide across. I always remember this class I had once, and a student who was a gifted writer, she just said, well, I just like to see the good in people. And I said, well, that's really lovely, but you need to be able to look at the bad in people too if you're writing. You have to kind of, but it made her intensely uncomfortable to look at the complexity of people. People are complicated. They don't always behave well, and it is part of the job of the writer to look at the not the extremes necessarily, but at the kind of range of human behaviour that's possible, and to try and understand what's going on with that behaviour. And that includes unpleasant behaviour, and I'm sure we're all capable of not being our best selves, and there's interesting reasons why that's the case, and that's good material to be looking at. So I think dig deep into human experience. Don't just kind of glide across the surface of it, but really, like there's this great American writer, Anne Lamott, who wrote this wonderful, I'm sure you would know it, Bird by Bird. It's a book of writing advice, and she says that sometimes it's as if she's writing away and there's a little boy down a hole in the ground, down a kind of mine shaft, and he's kind of handing the material up to her through this hole in the floor, and she's just kind of busily dictating the material, writing down the material that he's posting up to her. And I think that is a kind of state that we're often looking for as writers. It doesn't happen every day, but there are these magical moments when you feel like you have tapped into the bit of information that you're trying to communicate to an audience, and you're just writing down the stuff that's being passed to you. And then you sort of sit back and look at it and think, well, I wonder where that came from. But that's the goal that you're looking for as a writer, not the stuff that you're trying to kind of clamp down on the you might start out with a particular idea for a short story, but don't be afraid of letting it run a little bit free when you're starting out. When you're starting out with those drafting bits, just let it go a little bit and see what comes out.
And I think also that idea about not expecting that kind of moment where the little boy's passing you those things, that's a long time coming sometimes, isn't it? It's that those first couple of drafts can sound pretty dead on the page, pretty clunky, and I think that's the advantage of, as you said, go deeper, go back to it, let it compost. And
be forgiving of yourself as a writer as well. There's not, I don't know anyone who does a great first draft. I really don't. Such an important point to remember. I think it's such a kind of odd thing, the idea that everything should be perfect straight away, or that we failed as writers if it's difficult. It is a difficult task, and even those moments where the material's being passed up to you are extremely rare. But it is that kind of relaxing into the material, and experienced writers might sit for weeks and just working away, waiting for those moments. But you keep writing anyway.
Yes.
That's the kind of really important bit about it, isn't it? Searching for the truth.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it would be a mistake to think of a short story in terms of an entry as a quick story. It's often it's often not a quick process, the short story.
I completely would. I remember the first I set myself to write a short story. I thought, I'm going to get a short story written, I'm going to get it published, I'm going to win that competition, and it's going to get me in front of a publisher. I really set out to do it in that exact way. And I picked apart a short story and had it all kind of out in a pattern on the floor. I was looking at the structure of the short story, trying to work it out. And I think it took me 6 weeks to write this short story. And I still remember it as the hardest thing I've ever written. It was just the kind of, just getting it right. They are a really incredible discipline, and I know there are some people who do it a lot more easily, and even some people who'll write a story in a day. But it is pretty rare. The discipline of writing a good short story is not an easy one. So it is a great idea to write down your first draft. If you can, put it away in a drawer, come back to it maybe a couple of weeks later, and then you kind of see it in a fresh way. It becomes not so much your work. You forget the really hard yards that you did over maybe one paragraph that you really fretted over, and it's just a bit easier to lose things, to kind of cut things that gave you some trouble in the making. That kind of drafting process, the going back, returning to the material is so important. But I do love the idea of the effort of going deeper, of pushing yourself as a writer is such an important one, and how you express that varies such a lot. And I had this writing teacher once who said, leave some blood on the page. And Dennis Johnson says, write naked, write in blood, write from exile. And that is just that you have to push yourself to do the uncomfortable, the things that make you uncomfortable. It's not, it's all speaking in metaphor. But if you're pushing yourself into the bits that make you a little bit uncomfortable, you're probably getting somewhere. I always think that's when people get upset with their writing, they say, oh, I don't like it, it makes me feel awful. And you're getting somewhere, keep going. I just think stick with it, absolutely. That's where you're getting into the reality of human experience.
Yes. So we talked lots about what we'd like to see in a short story and what we're hoping to see. If we were to flip that around, what would we like people writing stories to try and avoid if they could?
Oh, yeah. I think for me, sometimes people just think of the short story as getting the plot right, just getting that structure right. But I think it's where a short story will fall down immediately is if we don't believe in the characters. And so it is just such an easy thing to, I spoke a little bit earlier about thinking of characters as types. Marilyn Robinson has this great thing that she says reality is mysterious, and characters are also, people are mysterious. And there is a tendency to kind of fit a shape of a person over this person that we're writing about, just to say that's the middle-aged housewife. But we have to forget all of our assumptions about people and really, really observe them, really, look at the reality of them and let them surprise us. So I'm looking for characters who feel as individual as people. And sometimes, I think maybe we use characters as a kind of shorthand term. But the minute I start thinking of the people I'm writing about as people, not as characters, I start taking them more seriously. I just think, what is this person? Who are they? What makes them tick? What is going to make me believe them? What's been going on in their lives? So I think people, not character. Who are the people? And then what about their setting? Where do they live? What are the circumstances of their lives? I need those things to feel real. And after those things, then what is this moment? What's happening in their lives? So I think it is the kind of avoiding cliche, avoiding cliched language. We speak in cliches. I speak in cliches. Like, as soon as I say we all think in shorthand, that's a cliche. You
Mm.
know, it's just what we say. That's how we all get around speaking. But when we're writing, and you in your first draft are likely to just put down that kind of shorthand speech, the cliched words that we're comfortable using. But try going beyond those. Think, what is another way of expressing that? When you're describing things, what is a fresh way of describing a landscape or a house setting? What is a fresh way of describing a person? Like, if you describe someone as a bustling matron or a knockabout tradie, that doesn't tell me anything other than they're a type. But we're looking for that. You know, how do they tie a shoelace moment? That sort of thing. Yeah, so no cliches. That ribbon thing, tying the end up in a kind of tidy way, you know, it's like, voila, there's my, yeah, the perfect ending. Yeah, it's not necessary. It doesn't add to anything. It sometimes bends a story out of shape if people try and do that. There could be a story that's been working really well, and then there is this kind of lunging towards resolution. But it would be stronger without that moment of resolution. Those are the sorts of things. But there are other things. What you were thinking about things the other day too.
In terms of what to avoid, I think trying to do too much in a short story, too many characters, and trying to cover long periods of time, into multi-generational kind of families migrating, and very complex kind of plot lines are probably more suited to a longer space. So I think, as you said, the short story is very condensed. We're looking for, really a moment in time almost, or something that could turn on a coin. And I think the fewer characters and the more intense that look we get at them, the better, rather than too many folks and too much happening.
Yeah, and that kind of a great reduction in the thematic content is so important, isn't it? That I think it's kind of helpful to think, what is this thing you're writing about? I'm writing about grief. I'm writing about this loss. I'm writing about transition from one bit of life to another. I think sometimes it's really helpful when you're writing a story just to say to yourself, what are you trying to say? What is the thing that you're trying to say? And if you can't, for a short story, say it pretty quickly, like what is in a maybe one or two sentences, you might have a bit too much going on.
Yes. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a good.
So you're kind of writing your own synopsis of your work. What's the synopsis of this work? And if it's a long synopsis for a short story, it's maybe not a short story.
Yes, it's working against you then, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that we were also mentioning is the importance of when you're fairly happy with your work, read it aloud. Look back at it, read it out loud, really make yourself do it, and just project your voice a little bit, throw yourself into it. And it's incredible, the funny little repetitions of words that you'll come across. Clunky dialogue. The dialogue that we speak is not exactly the same as the dialogue that people write on a page. Dialogue on a page is a very curated dialogue. It's very compressed. It's not every single thing that we'd say, because all of the stuff that we say to each other is not that fascinating. It's a lot of kind of, here we are in the same room. How are you? How are you? Isn't it a lovely day? This is not fascinating stuff to have in a novel or a short story, really. So really think about your dialogue. And the other thing that is incredibly important is just to be very aware of other people's dialogue when you're reading that, like to be thinking in a kind of critical writing way. Do I like this dialogue? What is this dialogue doing in this piece of writing? Wonder why the writer included that. And so dialogue should be revealing character and ideally propelling propelling plot in some way, moving it forward. It doesn't have to be in an incredibly dynamic, dramatic way, but it will be doing a couple of things at the same time. It won't just be kind of introducing characters to each other.
And I guess unless it's doing either of those two things, revealing character or propelling the plot,
Yeah.
it's one of those things that we can be leaving out.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and you can always try taking a bit out and looking at it and thinking, oh, actually, I did like it, and just leave it there for a little bit. I kind of believe in, there's the phrase "kill your darlings," that you have to kill the things that you're really in love with because you've worked so hard on them and you're really pleased with them. And it's true that that is a really good thing to be able to do, to kill those darlings. But it is also true, I think, that if you have a great resistance to cutting something out, sometimes you need to listen to that as well. And you find out further down the track that that is the thing that had the life in it. And there was some other stuff that had to go. So, it just be careful. Be careful while you're doing it. Really think about it and, listen to those sorts of resistant moments as well. And that's really important.
I know I heard Arnold Zabel say one day, I knew I was a writer when I learnt to love rewriting. And the idea that you spend as much time or more rewriting as you did writing originally. And I think that editing process really comes across when we're reading stories in a competition. How much thought has gone into that polishing and editing, would you say?
I definitely would, and I think it's in that rewriting process that you'll often start seeing these little patterns emerging, and you'll see the connections maybe between the character's, your person's psychological state and the world that they're living in, and that's where those metaphorical layers start appearing. You think, oh, I wonder if that, I've noticed that jug. I wonder what's going on with the jug. Maybe the jug is half full, or, I don't know. I've never written anything with a jug that's been important, but I'm just thinking about examples. But you start being aware of things, emblems or motifs or symbols that are appearing in your writing. And sometimes that will happen in the editing process. You start noticing those things. And once you've noticed them, you can just slightly highlight them just to make people a little bit aware of that thing. And with Alice Munro, when she's crossing the bridge, there's just a little bit of detail in the description of the bridge, the narrowness of it, the character looking over the edge of the bridge and not wanting to fall into the kind of swampy water. If you can just highlight those things a little bit so the reader's aware, either, a reader can be kind of subconsciously aware, picking up those cues, feeling that precariousness, the anxiety, the worry. Just those sorts of things often come out in those later stages.
And I think it's very rewarding as a reader, isn't it, to be able to work some of those things out for ourselves, to join the dots ourselves, and I think that makes the reading process so much more enjoyable rather than kind of being head over head with it. Do you think?
Oh, I do, and I think I think it's kind of the fascination for a writer as well. Part of that process is finding out what it is that you're trying to communicate. I always think of this fantastic story that Helen Garner talked about once, and she was sitting playing with one of her grandchildren in the back garden, and they had nothing but just a little stick each, and the kind of dirt was summery day, and they just kind of drawing around in the dirt with these sticks and they started making these patterns, and then they were kind of drawing things in them, and she just thought, this is what writing is. And in that first draft, all we're doing is sitting down in a pile of dirt, just kind of stirring the dirt with our sticks, and then we start making patterns, and then we start looking at the patterns and thinking about them. And this is a little bit how writing evolves. And that's why I think that being kind to yourself in that first stage when you're drafting, just like we're all just playing around in our little piles of dirt, seeing what emerges. I find that such a kind of potent idea. And instantly, if you think of yourself as a child just exploring, just kind of messing around, playing, the pressure is off.
Mm.
Just take the pressure out of it. Just what's happening? What's happening? What are we exploring? What are we looking at in the world? What's on the page? And then looking at that, the marks we've made in the dirt. I love that idea, and I have found it because all writers get stressed about their work and think, "Oh, I'm doomed. I'm never going to write again," or "It's all going so badly."
Yes.
It's such a good thing to remember. Be kind to yourself.
Yes.
Be kind to yourself in the writing. Yeah.
Wow. I'm conscious of time, Lucy, and I know we had a few other things we wanted to talk about. I'm just wondering if you had some thoughts about if people were wanting to kind of explore the short story form, who would be some good short story writers to have a read of?
Yes. Well, Australia is incredibly blessed with its short story writers, and one short story collection, I'm just going to hold this up, that I've read a couple of times this year is this one. Let me have a look. Here Until August, Josephine Rowe. It was shortlisted for the Stella Prize this year, and it is really an incredible collection of short stories. She makes great use of landscape in a kind of metaphorical way. She uses it often to indicate a kind of precariousness of a psychological state or a kind of relationship in one particular short story. She's really excellent. Another one is, who I love, he's one of my favourite ever writers, is Dennis Johnson. This is Jesus' Son. Not at all religious. It's about kind of down and out wastrel types in the United States. And it has a kind of very gritty, oblique way of looking at life. He is an absolutely extraordinary writer. Anything he writes is worth reading, and that is amazing. And he had a one final posthumous collection that came out called The Largesse of the Sea Maiden, which is also fantastic. So they're two that I've been reading a lot lately, and I find just incredibly, not inspirational, but they make me think a lot about my approach to writing, and they're very original in the way they see the world and in the way they depict it, looking at people in a kind of fascinating way. I think you had some places that you love too, short stories.
I love anthologies where you're reading a collection, a lot of people's short stories, and there's some certainly great anthologies around the best Australian stories, award-winning Australian writing, any of the literary journals, Kill Your Darlings, Overland, any of those, and you're getting a chance to see how people do it, and without any constraints on theme or. I think a good anthology is probably a good way to start if you're thinking about writing short stories. I love any of Kate Kennedy's works, her collections, Dark Rooms or Like a House on Fire. By Tim Winton, Paddy O'Reilly.
Paddy O'Reilly, she's fantastic.
Spoiled, aren't we? Spoiled in Australia.
Yeah, we sure are. There's this fantastic story by Kate Kennedy called Cold Snap that I often return to, that has such a strange child narrator and this very gothic quality, but it is filled with this sensory detail. She's a really wonderful short story writer. I completely agree. Yeah.
Wow. Have you got any final thoughts, Lucy, about if people are watching and they're thinking about entering? Anything? Any words?
Yeah. I sometimes think it is such a hard thing when you're starting out writing or you're not terribly experienced to make that leap to send your work out into the world. And it takes courage, and I think that should be acknowledged more, that in that moment there is a kind of vulnerability in it. You're putting your work out there and someone is going to be making a kind of assessment. There's no getting away from that, or the fact that if you're unsuccessful, you're going to feel disappointed. But it's also important to remember that every single writer feels that. It's part of the writing life. People who are successful novelists or successful short story writers or are generally revered as writers, have exactly the same feelings. And
Mm.
one of the things that I think is incredibly important is to build up a little writing world around you.
Mm.
And if you're having, we send our work out, we have a bad day, you get together with your writing friends and you say, oh, that sucks.
Mm.
How awful. And then you pick yourself up and keep going. And that's the kind
Mm.
of really important thing. So I just say, it is hard sending your work out. We all have that, that horrible moment when, we think, oh, are they going to like my work? And what we're really thinking partly is, do they like me? So it feels very personal. And
Yeah,
writing is personal because you're putting yourself on the page.
sure.
But be brave is what I think is really important. And being brave as a writer is just so much part of the writing life that we all have to kind of join in that enormous ocean of risk taking,
Yeah, and
and
it
see the great
easy,
side of that. Sorry,
and it gets easier, I think, I think,
it does. Yeah, yeah,
or we get tougher or something, but it's,
a little bit of both.
mm,
Yeah, yeah. I think it's such a yeah. It just, but it is also lovely being part of that world.
mm,
And just saying, yeah, I am going to take that risk. I'm going to join that world and start sending my thoughts out. And, sometimes people say there's so much good stuff already in the world, but, no one has written your stuff. No one has got your exact take on the world.
mm,
And
mm,
any individual's take on the world, what they have observed about people, is
yeah,
as worthwhile as anyone else's.
mm,
So when people say that, I just think, oh, no one cares. Like, it's just you write the things that you want to write. There's
mm.
always room for more good writing.
Oh, that's true. And I guess from a judge's point of view, it's always good to just remind people to check the word limit for the competition. I
Yes,
know we've got a word limit of 3,000 words for this competition. Small things like getting the deadline right, getting your story in, not having your name on your actual story, just having a read through those submission guidelines. I think to so that you're putting your story out in the world with its best foot forward.
absolutely. I totally agree. It's part of the being brave and thorough.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, Lucy, it's been great speaking with you today. Thank you for your
Oh,
time
you too.
talking about short stories with us. We're hoping that people who are watching will think about being brave and sending in their
Yeah.
story, and also joining Lucy for Right Around the Murray sessions in September, when she'll be talking more about her work. So we're looking forward to seeing you in whatever form that takes in September,
Yeah.
Lucy.
No, I'm looking forward to, and I'm really looking forward to reading everyone's stories. Yeah, can't wait. So
Great.
good luck, everyone. Be brave.
Thanks, Lucy.
Thank you. Thanks, Kate.